The NBA playoffs include the top 8 teams from the Western and Eastern Conference for competitive play. With these teams being top 8 in their conference, you generally suspect them to be somewhat competitive games. But sometimes, one team plays out of their minds, or the other just becomes trash, or that one of the teams is just so much more skilled than their opponent. That game ends up resulting in a huge blowout. Anyways, here are the top 5 biggest blowouts in NBA playoff history. The Western Conference semifinals in 1971 between the 70-17 Milwaukee Bucks and the 42-45 San Francisco Warriors was one of the biggest blowouts in NBA history. The Warriors were off to a bad start and were in a big hole, trailing 38-18 after the first quarter. But for the rest of the game, there was no effort, as the Warriors were down 3-1 and facing elimination. The Warriors lost all hope and proceeded to be outscored for the rest of the game. The final score was 136-86, an insane 50-point loss in a playoff game. This was a big surprise, considering that the previous games were all only at max a 14-point difference. Milwaukee was led by John McLaughlin with 28 points. Right behind him was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar with 23. The first round of the 2015 NBA playoffs was between the 3-seed Chicago Bulls and the 6-seed Milwaukee Bucks. The first 3 games were taken by Chicago, and Milwaukee avoided the sweep, taking the next 2. The series was 3-2 in Chicago's favor, and Milwaukee, just coming off 2 straight wins, felt as if they were going to create a huge upset, winning the series after being down 3-0. But Chicago decided to show their dominance and put a beating on Milwaukee, outscoring them in every single quarter by double digits except the third. But in the end, this resulted in a 120-66 loss for the Bucks, and they were eliminated from the playoffs. A crazy 54-point loss. And a loss like this, especially one that eliminated you from the playoffs, has to be demoralizing. I mean, the highest scoring Buck that game was Zaza Pachulia with only 8 points. The Bucks shot 32.9% for the game, while the Bulls shot 51.1% and hit exactly 50% of their threes. And this game is definitely not one that any Buck fan wants to remember. The 1973 Western Conference Finals was between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Golden State Warriors. The Lakers were up 2-0 and were looking to take a commanding 3-0 lead. Rick Barry from the Warriors was locked up the entire game and only scored a team high of 10 points. I mean, when your best player scores the most points on your team and it was only 10, that's just begging for a blowout. And while the Lakers, with 6 of their players in double figures, led by Jim McMillan with 28, were dominant the entire game. They outscored the Warriors 36-16 and 37-20 in the third and fourth quarters respectively, and ended the game 126-70, a 56-point blowout. Jerry West added 16 points while Wilt Chamberlain added 12. The Warriors should be just happy that they didn't have to face a prime Wilt Chamberlain here, who was 36 at the time of this game. If they did, the loss might have been even worse. The Warriors ended up taking the next game, but ended up losing the series 4-1. In the early days of the NBA of the 1956 West Division semifinals, the Minneapolis Lakers were up against the St. Louis Hawks. This was the very first most lopsided playoff game in history, with a 133-175 win for the Lakers. The Hawks lost by a crazy 58 points this game, and you think with a 58-point loss, this would turn the entire series in the Lakers' favor. However, that wasn't even the case, as the Hawks proceeded to win the next game and knock the Lakers out of the playoffs. I mean, the adjustment the Hawks made had to be a crazy one, especially when the game before that, they lost by 58 points. Some of you may remember this game as the worst loss in a playoff game in more recent times, even worse than the Bucks vs Bulls in 2015. The Denver Nuggets came into New Orleans being up 2-1. Given that the Nuggets were on the road, you'd already think New Orleans would have the advantage here, but the Hornets proceeded to brick shot after shot, only shooting 31.5% the entire game. Star player Chris Paul on the Hornets even only scored 4 points by the game's end and was a -38 for the game. The Nuggets shot an amazing 56.6% and had 7 players in double figures, and 3 of them were off the bench. They were led by Carmelo Anthony's 26 points, and right behind him was Chauncey Billups with 17. The Hornets were even outscored by more than 20 points in 2 of the quarters. By the game's end, the final score was 121-63, another 58-point loss. And this loss was probably too much for the players to handle, and it ended up making them lose any motivation for the next game, and they were eliminated from the playoffs after being blown out again by losing by 21 points in the very next game. These losses were just crazy, especially considering they were playoff games and both teams should be trying to play like it was their very last game ever. Anyways guys, those are the 5 worst blowouts in NBA playoff history. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Till next time, I'm Handles, and I'm out.